Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I will keep my phone running this stopwatch just to make sure I'm in time because I have a flight to catch after this. So for that. Okay. There are plenty of talk about measurements, about quantification, and design. And I'm sorry, I'm going to continue that trend of this afternoon. Urban ergonomics. We are in Copenhagen. This is the city when you try to understand the human experience. Probably a mentor of all young architects. Young Gale is from this city. And he started all this understanding, trying to apprehend how we observe and how we experience in the city rather than just looking at good-looking things. But this understanding needs to be extended somewhat, and given all the technological development of these days, of course. And 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when Ian Pei was designing the pyramid in the Louvre, he had to personally stand there to explain to the Parisians and why he designed this and how it will look like, because people would find it hard just to try to imagine what would happen in the cities. But nowadays, we do have a chance of changing some of that to some degree. Of course, if you look at like 600 years since Alberti, probably, there is a gaping gap between what we know about the built stuff and what we know about how we experience the built stuff. It's because of that gap of imagination, of comprehension before something is constructed, and also because of the lack of means of precisely mapping the human cognitive process to what we design and what we would want to build. But there is a possibility of trying to compensate for this. We have been doing that for over the last 10 years. And by the way, and because of the ending of the economic boom, if you like, in China, and there are less and less new projects in China, and things are turning a bit. So there are many Chinese architects in the past decades turning to look deeper into science, to try to have new quantitative means of doing design, and try to revival something mentioned by Buckminster Fuller in the 1950s, design science. Of course, I'm among them, and we have been reasonably called traitors by some of our colleagues, and we take that as a compliment. For example, this is in the big air ski jump for the Beijing 2022 Winter Games, and is right next to the cooling tower in the capital steel factory reused on this heritage project. And the interesting thing is that currently you have all the means, and even when you only have the OBS, which is Olympic Broadcasting Service, images, videos of the athletes, you can still know what the athletes were looking at when they were at the starting point. And if we compare this with the previous one in Pyeongchang, you do see that because of the existing of the kind of industrial heritage in the first layer of the scene and then the modern city in the back, it did generate some sort of stimuli to the athletes, and that's why they looked at the slope and then in the front. In Pyeongchang, because there is no such a thing, you do see this kind of quite evenly distributed view angles. And we're not talking about the design of the jump itself. That is very architectural. But another thing is how to create this visual, interesting stuff. This is for the television viewers. I asked Martin from the Olympic Broadcasting Survey, like, what kind of lens do you use? He told me, when we were shooting people jumping at the highest point, we would use 400 mil. So using 400 mil, if we try to project the athlete silhouettes right onto the side of the cooling tower without necessarily showing the cooling tower, the entire profile of the cooling tower, you do actually find a place of the camera. Of course, the further the better. But this is the furthest point until it is reaching out to the secured area. So we built a stand there and created this view angle, a pretty popular image of Beijing 2022. So, to quote this, some call it the evil professor of our time, Professor Zeki from MIT, if we don't call MIT the evil university, he does this neural aesthetic thing. And he said, in the end, things processed here could be decoded, including all the aesthetic judgments of ourselves. This is pretty scary. But he didn't make it. He did make some part here, some part there, but he didn't make it entirely. Anyway, we still can use the same kind of mentality, try to decode some commonalities in our citizens' experience of the city. So if we have to guess or even make educated guess back then, we can do some, maybe, some more applicable, more justifiable predictions now. Assisted by these kind of technologies, high fidelity virtual environments constructed from game engines. And again, this city is the birthplace of one of the most popular gaming engines, Unity. And they're not doing at the best in their history, but still very influential one. And to show respect to the city, I'm going to use examples that we have created with Unity. These are the physiological measurements that you can take, that you can quantify from the modern devices, and then you can couple that with the virtual environment information, and then you would have something to process, assisted by all the data processing technology these days. And that is basically what ergonomics are about, is try to incorporate the quantitative methods assisted by data science and by the high fidelity virtual environment, and also sometimes assisted by AI, to make better, detailed design decisions. This is not to replace design. It's just to incorporate into our creative design process. When we are finally trying to do something for the most number of citizens, we need to know what is the biggest commonality. These are the 4 scales we would analyze, and this is created by Unity, by the way. For example, if we have at least 2 videos of the room live broadcasting, it is very easy for us to generate abstracted, reconstructed scenes in these 4 scales. So, for example, when you were leaning towards your, and people sitting on your side, we know some kind of audio communication is taking place, like shown there. Of course, today's symposium is about daylighting. I don't have a very convincing examples and projects of daylighting, but something on lighting. So the same kind of mentality and process can be used in the design of lighting in architecture. And you see the solid blue blocks, they show a, you may say, this is the augmented design process, using these quantitative methods, modern technology, without actually distracting or changing the direction of design, but to try to realize the design concept in a more useful way. 3 projects One is, well, that was a bad time. Lanterns in China. The lanterns, they are quite unique in such a way. They light the streets, but at the same time providing information. They become a usable media. The media is used as a utility that illuminates your streets, but at the same time also readable. So when I was the curator for the China Pavilion for Venice Biennale 2020 or 2021, because it delayed for 1 year, and ironically, and that was the only Biennale that I wasn't there myself recently, we somehow developed this, because we remember that was on the height of the pandemic, and masks and social distancing was still quite dominant. So we created a street, a dark street, lighted up by lanterns, but not by real lanterns, but using these cell phones and iPads as lanterns. And we noticed people's movement around it. And because when you look at these, when you place these lanterns at least 1 meter away from each other, people would be in such distances. And the similar thing for because China Pavilion and Italian Pavilion always share the same courtyard near the closing end of the Arsenale. We always, the China Pavilion always have the opportunity of creating an outdoor pavilion in the courtyard. So we design similar things, but because this is under daylight and there is nothing brighter than the daylight, so we have to use color to give people the impression that there is something happening there. Semi-transparent, tinted panels. This is a mixed bag. Of course, it looks pretty acceptable, but the information printed in it are not that easily readable. And these are the prints, and they are printed in such a way. So if you are interested in the content, unfortunately, it's pretty hard to read. But to create the mix of color tinting, probably, and this is more important than the content itself. The next project is about wayfinding. This is not our project. It's a game developed by a Chinese and startup company, and the very, very successful blacksmith Wukong. But interestingly, people always get lost while playing the game. And this is the quotes from the online forums, always telling people where to find the next level, but still people miss it 90% of the time. And the same happens in our cities. This, interesting, in Beijing and in Shanghai, the two major Chinese cities, each city has one perfect example of way losing. It's 100% when you first there. And interestingly, both of these owners of these properties, and they approached us because they know what we were doing, tried to improve their current environment. This is the World Trade Center of Beijing, the basement retail district. And the other one in Shanghai, by the way, is the metro station of People's Square. You have 36 exits, and you lose your way. So we did a complete virtual reconstruction of this place. And we did the same for Shanghai, but Shanghai is not shown here because it's not created with Unity. This one is. And then we found out that actually what is destroying people's very few hints of wayfinding is exactly these atriums. These atriums is lighted with access to daylight. They are supposed to create a sense of orientation, make people easier to find the way. But because, and this is what HSK, when they designed the street, they quoted, this is from Chinese tradition. You have the courtyard to see all the layers of the spaces. You have an understanding of the sequence. People did understand the sequence, but in the wrong way. If we look at how people get lost, it's pretty clear that there are at least 3 of these kind of atriums. They are designed in a similar fashion. This is one. This is another one. People, because when they're moving around the shopping street, they don't necessarily recognize the differences between these atriums, and they would mistake them for being the same atrium, and then their entire strategy of moving around the street would be messy. So after that, we did some design suggestion, is to make these atriums as different as possible, even if you are not focused on what is inside the atriums. And here you have a simulation of the modified design. And this shows before, that shows after. Still 10% you would lose your way, and there is nothing we can do about it. The last example is a pretty controversial one, is lighting as consolation. I thought that it would be hard to talk on this project because it basically is trying to fake something that it is not there. But from the last session, I remember there was some discussion over this, and particularly a very, very interesting question in the panel session about when people have access to Windows, and certainly Windows are great. If we don't have it, can we have something similar to generate the same kind of soothing effect for the people living in the interior? And we do find that the visual thing is not static. You just create that image, it matters very little. You have to create the sense of time. We are somewhat more comfortable when we know the environment we are living in had some sort of registration of time. I don't know whether there is this cognitively true, but at least to our research, it showed that when you have some kind of object providing this registry of time, it does make you feel that this environment is more intimate. And we see this in all kinds of buildings, in all kinds of traditional paintings. Just to have these shadows are not enough. They have to move. And when they move, they do generate this very subtle effect of soothing, of consolation. And then when we do this kind of, we have some dozens of testees, volunteers taking these tests. They have been basically mentally tortured before they enter this. You have to do 100 maths questions, and then you have to do a random test of repeating a digit of 7 to 9 numbers given to you in the reversed direction. So a pretty laborious and torturous experience before you enter these tests. Without lighting, with lighting, and then with the shaking, moving shadows. We do see those lines. The quicker the drop, the better. So it shows a clear advantage for the moving shadows. The same for the heart rate recovery. And also, almost equally obvious, it's in the RMSSDs, basically a psychological effect of your recovery to calmness. So we can be pretty certain that the image, the lowest image in the bottom, would be something desirable, even if when you don't have a window. And this is a project that there is no window possible. Because now in Beijing, you don't have permission to play or to build any new thing on the ground anymore. The FAR for the entire city has been reached. What you need to do, if you want to have more space, you go underground. And the same happens in my university. We won this competition again in 2020. And this is to have a new student center beneath one baseball field and 4 soccer fields. You wouldn't be able to have any window or skylight. Currently, there is no technology to place a skylight in a football field. Probably VELUX would develop one. So this is basically the design. You tilt up the residue space beyond the playgrounds, the field of plays. You create this, somehow jam you squeeze this semi-outdoor space in the entrance beneath the back of that baseball field, and then you enter basement 1, and then basement 2. And this is where you enter in between these 2 group of fields. But the problem is basement 2 and basement 3. If basement 1 still, you can have some sunken space to gather some daylight, basement 2 and 3 are totally deprived of any access to direct daylight. So we use this. And we have 2 Chinese companies in Shenzhen who are currently developing this. And they're very good at creating fake things. It's pretty shocking. We even tried. It could not be shown here in the presentation because we don't have the authorization to show the old people. When we move the old people's wheelchair into the space with such, all of a sudden they get calmed down. So almost immediate effect. And very cheap. If you have a lighting, for example, projection of 1 square meter, it costs about 85 to 100 RMB. So it's very, very affordable. To wrap up, we do have these quantification methods, but is by no means trying to replace design process. It's to improve design process. It's just to make more certain that what we do in the design would work for most of the people. This is a picture taken of one of the villains, shall we say, in my university, who's a professor who is basically promoting AI in all the professions, saying eventually, including architects, would be replaced by AI. We have a sense that it's a race. Either they made their AI to be more intelligent, to try to replace us, or we have our access to the technologies of our age, to the quantification methods of our age, and still maintain the dignity of design. And we believe architecture will prevail. Thank you very much indeed.